Long before he became a Pulitzer Prize winner for poetry, Gregory Pardlo was in the United States Marine Corps and he managed a jazz club. But those career paths soon changed when he got his BA from Rutgers University and a master's from Columbia, and now with a PhD in English, his award-winning poems have been published in the best of volumes and anthologies. A teaching fellow at Columbia and visiting associate professor at NYU Abu Dhabi, as chair of the jury of the Gratiaen Prize, that's the 32nd Gratiaen Prize, Gregory added multiple dimensions into Sri Lanka's most prestigious English Literature Prize. He joins me today on Kaleidoscope to discuss Sri Lankan literature in all its multiple layers. What has this year's journey been like? What has it revealed about the literary pulse of Sri Lanka? What were your expectations? What challenged your expectations?
I tried not to have any expectations coming in, but I am overall really impressed by how much the Gratiaen Prize itself is revered and how actively it sees itself as contributing to the literary culture. I think in a lot of places the literary prizes are seen as defenses against incursion, but the Gratiaen seems to be really welcoming and exploratory.
So as someone who brings in an international and perhaps a comparative lens, literary lens, how does Sri Lanka's literature stand out uniquely to you?
I noticed there was, I think with all of the kind of spiritual and secular history here, there was an interesting way that the writers were drawing on everything from myth to spirituality to religion to kind of metaphysics, and there was a seamlessness between it. I think in the work that I'm kind of used to, or the literary culture I'm used to, there's an either-or kind of factor. And so I think this contributed to the kind of surrealist quality of the work.
Did any particular genre, any particular form stand out this year in terms of innovation?
I do genuinely believe that the poetry was far and away more adventurous. Of course, there were some poems, some collections where the poet was working more in a modernist or British romantic vein, but the ones that did try to stand out did so in spectacular ways.
So Sri Lanka has multiple layers of language, identity. Did these complexities actually come out in any way?
English seemed to be a kind of third wheel in the relationship, right? And so there's Tamil and Sinhalese. When there were discussions of language, the work seemed to be more interested in the relationship between the two domestic languages. And English seemed to be a kind of a shared bucket that everyone had recourse to, but the energy seemed very much to be between the two.
So you've managed a jazz club.
Yes.
You've also been in the Marines, and then you went into writing poetry and writing per se. How has all this married into your work as you progress?
Well, certainly the sense of discipline. I don't think I could have held myself in a seat long enough to write even the shortest text. I was a kind of hyperactive kid growing up, and the military gave me a lot of backbone.
And the jazz gave you respite.
And the jazz gave me the permission to explore my imagination.
Coming from your background of writing, of literature, what parallels, what contrasts do you find with Sri Lankan storytelling?
You know what was surprising early on was in the US, let's put it this way, in the US, it's kind of distasteful, if not frowned upon, because of our history of exploitation, to write in the voice of someone who's from a less privileged perspective. And I was really impressed with the sensitivity with which a lot of authors tried to bring in the voices without, sort of co-opting them of marginalized perspectives.
Was there a moment in that reading process where a line or a passage truly sort of stopped you in your tracks?
I don't know if there was a specific line. I mean, there were certainly lines, there were images that leapt out. But I think overall, what was most moving to me were those moments when the whole text seemed to come into focus, and I realized what the author or the poet was up to. Because, you know, we read very kind of superficially, and then you read again a little more deeply, and slowly the meaning starts to come together. And I love those moments when I say, I see, because it opens up a new world, not to be too dramatic.
In what ways do you feel literature in Sri Lanka is actually navigating this political and historical landscape?
Well, I would go back to what I was saying about this kind of drawing on the religious, mythical, historical backgrounds, and the diversity of society. But I think there's a way that the work that we read, was unafraid of the history, was present to the history. I think I'm more used to writers who will either stick their head in the sand and pretend that there are no problems, or deal with it in a kind of bombastic way. And there seemed to be a kind of sobriety across the text that we read.
If we were to map the emotional landscape of the pieces we read, joy, hope, grief, there's a whole gamut out there. What emotions do you think actually dominated the landscape?
I don't know if there was a single, of course, thing, and I feel really self-conscious saying this because I've been here for a week, and the work, the few books that we read in comparison overall. But I do think there's, if you forgive me a slight digression, driving in Colombo, right? I see so few, and of course there are instances of road rage, right? But the drivers that I've been with, I've seen, we'll get cut off and we'll kind of tisk and go on. And I think that there's a quality of that in the writing, where there's a kind of detached bemusement that is observant, that is analytical, and also masking a kind of outrage, right? And so there is a consciousness of the ethics of the situations and of the text.
So, if you were to recommend Sri Lankan literature to a global audience or global reader who doesn't know anything about it, what would you say is the strength or the calling card for Sri Lankan literature?
There is still this kind of ambivalence around the relationship to English and the colonial, models of it, which I think is consistent throughout any post-colonial society and beyond. But I think there's a way that Sri Lankan writers are thinking about the relationship to the text that is diasporic, that is cosmopolitan, that is seeing beyond the moment at hand.
Lots of layers.
Very much.
Thank you so much, Greg.
My pleasure.
Kaleidoscope is on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Do subscribe, follow, and like us if you want more of us.